Have you ever been the one who held everything together, only to realize no one was holding you? You paid the bills, remembered everyone's birthdays, showed up for the emergencies, but when you needed someone, the line went dead. That's my story. And maybe it's yours too. My name is Rachel Monroe. I'm 41 years old, an emergency room nurse in a small town in Colorado. I've spent the last 8 years of my life pouring into my family, emotionally, physically, financially, because that's what you're supposed to do, right? That's what a good daughter does. A good sister. A responsible adult. After my dad passed from a heart attack, my mom fell apart in quiet, complicated ways. She stopped working, stopped driving, stopped trying, and I stepped in. I started sending her $1,800 a month to help with the mortgage, groceries, utilities, everything my father used to handle. Just until she gets back on her feet, I told myself. But she never did. Then there was my younger brother, Cody. Always charming. Always making promises he couldn't keep. He had a minor addiction issue, at least that's what we called it back then, to keep things light. He moved back into mom's house, couldn't keep a job longer than 2 months, and I somehow became the lifeline for both of them. First, I didn't mind. I believed I was doing the right thing. I picked up extra shifts, gave up vacations, wore the same pair of nursing clogs for 5 years. My life became one long cycle of working, wiring money, and telling myself, this is love. But here's the part no one talks about. When you give everything long enough, people stop seeing it as kindness. They start to expect it. And when you can't give anymore, you're no longer useful. I remember one night vividly. I had just finished a 12-hour double shift. I came home to a sink full of dishes, unopened mail, and a voicemail from my mom saying, "The electric bill's overdue again. Can you just take care of it? No, how are you? No, are you eating okay?" Just a casual reminder of my place, the fixer. You'd think the people closest to you would notice when you're running on empty. But they didn't. Maybe because I never showed it. I was the capable one. The strong one. And strong people don't break until they do. I kept a photo on my fridge. It was of me, Cody, and Mom at my dad's funeral. We were all holding hands, pretending we'd stay close forever. I stared at that photo so many nights, wondering if the promise we made even meant anything to them. Or if I was the only one still holding on. What I didn't understand then, and what I learned the hard way, is that love doesn't mean enabling. Support shouldn't be a one-way street. And when being needed is the only connection you have to your family, you're not loved, you're used. There's this quote I came across in a grief support group years later. It said, "Some people will never understand the damage they do because they're too busy thinking they're the ones who are hurt." That was my family in one sentence. Still I stayed. I kept helping. Until something happened that forced me to see the truth I'd been avoiding. Something that made me realize no one was going to catch me if I fell. But I did fall. Hard. And that's where this story really begins. The Christmas that broke me. They say the holidays are about family, togetherness, love. But what happens when the people you call family choose somewhere else, and someone else when you need them most? It was Christmas Eve when my body gave out. I had been pushing through abdominal pain for weeks, brushing it off as stress or bad diet. Nurses are the worst patients. We know just enough to ignore the signs until they scream. That night they screamed loud. I collapsed during my shift. One moment I was checking a teenager's 4-line, the next I was doubled over, barely breathing. The ER team, my team, rushed me onto a gurney. A CT scan revealed a ruptured ovarian cyst and internal bleeding. I needed surgery. That night, I wasn't scared of the surgery. I was scared of what would happen if something went wrong, and no one came for me. As they prepped me for the OR, I called my mom. No answer. I tried again. Voicemail. Then I texted Cody. "Emergency surgery tonight. Can one of you come?" It took him 26 minutes to reply. His response: "We're already in Vegas. Mom's doing spa. I'm at a show. Chill, Ratch. You'll be fine." I stared at the message for a long time. My hands were shaking. I wasn't sure if it was from the pain or the realization. Maybe both. A nurse named Cheryl sat with me as I cried quietly. I wasn't sobbing. It was that silent kind of crying where your body just gives up. She held my hand and asked if I had anyone to list as an emergency contact. I paused, and for the first time in my life I had to say no. No one was coming. The irony? I'd been the emergency contact for my mom and brother for years. Doctor visits, insurance paperwork, even job applications. I was the person they put down when things got real. But when it was my turn, they were too busy sipping cocktails under twinkling hotel lights. Cheryl must have sensed something, because she asked if there was a neighbor or friend she could call. I remembered Ms. Dawson, my elderly neighbor who used to leave cinnamon bread on my doorstep every Christmas. She had no obligation to me, no blood ties, but when Cheryl called, she came. She sat in the waiting room until I was out of surgery. She even brought her knitting. That was the moment I realized. Family isn't who shares your DNA. It's who shows up. I spent that Christmas in a dim hospital room, with the faint sound of carols playing through the hallway speakers and a bag of donated cookies from the staff break room. My phone stayed quiet, except for a Merry Christmas group text from my brother's burner number, followed by a photo of him at a blackjack table. No mention of me. No check-in. I wasn't just hurt. I was humiliated. Not because they chose a vacation over me, but because I had let it get this far. I had trained them to believe I would always be there, no matter how they treated me, that I would never need them in return. That night, lying alone in recovery, I made a quiet promise to myself. This ends now. I wouldn't keep proving my worth through money or availability. I wouldn't keep playing the caregiver in a family where no one cared for me. And I certainly wouldn't let guilt manipulate me into silence anymore. It's strange. Sometimes it takes being utterly abandoned to finally come home to yourself. Have you ever been left out by the very people you've always been there for? So, I'd love to hear your story in the comments. Maybe someone out there needs to hear it too. Cutting the wire that choked me. There's a moment, quiet but powerful, when you realize you've been holding the cord that's been strangling you. Not because you didn't know better, but because you were too afraid of what would happen if you let go. For me, that cord was $1,800 a month. That was the amount I sent my family. Every single month. No matter how tired I was, no matter how tight things got, that money left my account like clockwork. I'd been doing it for 8 years, since my dad died and my mom claimed she couldn't manage things alone. At first it felt right. Generous even. I made good money as a nurse. I didn't have kids or a spouse. Supporting my mom and brother felt like the least I could do. But over time it became less about love and more about fear. Fear that if I stopped, I'd be called selfish. Fear that they'd fall apart. Fear that I'd lose what little connection I still had with them. After my surgery, lying in that hospital bed alone, those fears finally looked ridiculous. I had just come out of anesthesia when my phone buzzed with a reminder, transfer scheduled, $1,800, Monroe household. That was the moment it hit me like cold water. I had almost died. Alone. While my family vacationed in Vegas and ignored my calls. And here I was, still sending them money. I asked the nurse for my phone. Hands trembling, I opened my banking app and canceled the automatic transfer. It wasn't a dramatic moment. No fireworks. No revenge music in the background. Just a quiet click and something inside me unclenched. That night, I sent a message to my mom and Cody. It was short. Effective immediately, I'm no longer providing financial support. Please don't contact me about money again. No, I'm sorry. No explanation. Just the boundary I should have set years ago. The fallout came fast. Within 48 hours, my phone was flooded with messages. First confusion. Then outrage. Then guilt-tripping. We counted on that money, Rachel. You said you'd help forever. You can't just abandon your family. How are we supposed to pay the mortgage now? Not once did anyone ask how my surgery went. Not once did they ask if I was okay. I expected that. What I didn't expect was the group email my mother sent to the extended family, painting me as cold, ungrateful, and unstable. She left out the part where she went to Vegas while I was in surgery, of course. What she didn't count on was that some people in our family had eyes and memories. My cousin Mia replied publicly, "Didn't you just post pictures from the Bellagio last week? Maybe that money should have gone to your bills, not blackjack." I didn't reply. I didn't have to. People were starting to see the truth for themselves. Here's what I learned in that chapter of my life. When you set boundaries, people who benefited from your lack of them will always call you the villain. Let them. You are not responsible for the life they chose. You are not a villain for stepping out of the role they wrote for you. And cutting someone off financially doesn't make you cruel. It might just be the kindest thing you do for yourself. I started using that $1,800 for things that actually mattered. Physical therapy, counseling, Rest. For the first time in years, I paid off a credit card. I bought fresh groceries. I took a week off work without guilt. And slowly, I started remembering who I was before I became their lifeline. Backhand index pointing right. Have you ever had to cut off someone you loved for your own survival? How did they react? I'd love to hear in the comments, because setting boundaries takes courage, and your story might give someone else the strength to do it too. The letter she never thought I'd read. Some apologies come too late. Others come so unexpectedly, you don't know what to do with them. It had been nearly 3 months since I'd cut off financial support and gone low contact with my family. My phone had gone from daily guilt trips to long empty silences. And honestly, I was grateful for the quiet. I needed space to breathe, to heal, to rebuild. That's why when I found the envelope in my mailbox, handwritten, no return address, I almost threw it away. Something about the script looked familiar. But I wasn't ready to invite more chaos into my life. Still, curiosity has a way of whispering louder than reason. I opened it. Inside was a folded piece of stationery with my mother's handwriting. No Dear Rachel, no date. Just words. Raw, shaky, and unlike anything I'd ever read from her before. I've had time to think. Watching you build a life without us has been painful, but also eye-opening. I used to tell myself you were overreacting, that you didn't appreciate all we sacrificed. But the truth is, you were right. You needed me and I chose to leave. You reached out and I turned my back. I didn't want to be needed that way, not with responsibility, just with admiration. That was selfish. I see that now. I must have read that paragraph 5 times. It wasn't flowery. It wasn't dramatic. It was, dare I say, honest. She went on. I resented how strong you were. I hated that you didn't crumble when Dad died the way I did. I thought if I leaned harder, you'd eventually break. But you didn't. Now, I'm ashamed. I didn't cry. Not right away. I just sat with it. Let it breathe. Then came the sentence that hit hardest. You needed a mother, and I wasn't one. I don't know what surprised me more. The admission, or how much I needed to hear it. She didn't ask for money. She didn't beg for forgiveness. She didn't even ask to see me. She simply said, I wanted you to know I understand now, if even a little. I showed the letter to Ms. Dawson, my neighbor, the woman who sat by me in the hospital when no one else did. She read it quietly and said, This sounds like a woman who's starting to grow up, finally. Then she smiled, handed the letter back and added, Growth doesn't mean reconciliation. You get to choose. And she was right. Because while I appreciated the apology, I wasn't ready to open my door again. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But something inside me shifted that day, not toward forgiveness exactly, but toward understanding. Toward peace. Here's what I've come to believe. Sometimes the closure we need doesn't come in the form of someone making it right. It comes in recognizing that they finally see it was wrong. That doesn't erase the past. It doesn't fix what was broken. But it allows us to stop carrying the weight of silence and denial. To say, yes, that happened. And now I can move forward. What my mother didn't know was that I'd already been building something new. I was no longer the woman crying alone in a hospital room. I had started seeing a therapist. I'd picked up a side project designing memorial websites. Turns out people in grief connect deeply with someone who understands loss. And I had even begun exploring the possibility of adoption after bonding with a little girl at the hospital who reminded me what tenderness looked like. And yes, I kept the letter. I didn't frame it. I didn't display it. I tucked it into the back of my journal, behind a page that simply read, I am no longer waiting for an apology to heal. Backhand index pointing right. Have you ever received an apology from someone you thought would never change? What did you do with it? Did you open the door? Or close it for good? Let me know in the comments. Your story might help someone make peace with their own. Building a life where I belong. Some lives are built from scratch. Others are rebuilt from what's left after everything falls apart. I didn't have a dramatic starting over moment. There was no suitcase at the door, no final goodbye screamed in anger. What I had was quieter, a decision made over oatmeal one morning, watching the snow fall outside my apartment window, thinking, this isn't the life I want to survive. I want one I can live. So I moved. Not far, just 2 towns over. Enough to breathe. I bought a modest house with a little fenced-in yard and a front porch that creaked when you stepped on it. It smelled like cedar and possibility. I brought little with me: my books, my teapot, the quilt my grandmother made. I left behind more than furniture. I left guilt, obligation, and the version of me that thought love meant overextending yourself until nothing was left. The house wasn't perfect. The walls needed paint. The water heater made a strange noise every other Tuesday. But it was mine. And every time I turned the key, it whispered, "You belong here." What surprised me most wasn't the relief, it was the community. Within days of moving in, a neighbor knocked with a welcome basket and an invitation to a weekend soup swap. A retired firefighter 2 doors down offered to help with the loose fence post. And Miss Dawson, who decided she wasn't done being my emergency contact, showed up with a casserole and a folded list of support groups in the area. One of those support groups met weekly at the library, a small circle of women, most of us carrying some version of the same story: loss, reinvention, and the long journey back to ourselves. We cried. We laughed. We helped each other fix leaky faucets and bake banana bread from scratch. And through that group, I met Lena. She was 5. Quiet. Curious eyes. She was the niece of one of the women in the group, staying temporarily while her mother went through rehab. Lena reminded me of what vulnerability looks like without shame. We read books together during meetings. She sat next to me like we'd always known each other. And one day, when her aunt asked if I could watch her for an afternoon, she didn't hesitate to reach for my hand. That evening, as we sat on my porch sipping hot cocoa, Lena asked, "Do you live here alone?" I smiled. Not really. Not anymore. That question stayed with me. Maybe I had been living alone, but I wasn't lonely. Not anymore. I was finally surrounded by people who didn't expect me to carry their weight, but who offered to help hold mine. It took losing what I thought was family to find what truly felt like home. Here's the truth I've come to understand. Sometimes we think belonging means being accepted by people who constantly hurt us. But real belonging comes when you stop shrinking yourself to fit into places you've outgrown. Now, my days are simpler. I still work as a nurse, but I've cut back my hours. My side business, creating memorial websites, has grown, not just in clients, but in meaning. I help families honor stories that deserve to be remembered with care. It's quiet work, but it fills something in me I didn't know was empty. And as for my parents? After therapy, downsizing, and what they called a season of reckoning, they asked to see me again. This time, not to demand, but to listen. I didn't rush to let them back in, but I allowed a small door to open. Supervised visits, careful conversations, and very clear boundaries. They're learning. And I'm healing. Backhand index pointing right if you've ever had to start over on your own terms, what helped you find peace. I'd love to hear your story in the comments. You never know who might need it. And if you found comfort in this kind of storytelling, real, raw, but always leading toward healing, I hope you'll consider staying with me here. Yellow heart, 1 click to subscribe helps me keep sharing the kinds of stories we don't always say out loud, but desperately need to hear. You're not alone, and you never have to be again.